It feels like Milan are the direct opposite, or at least their first couple of games have been the direct opposite of Barcelona, as we've been talking about. For Milan, they've been doing actually quite poorly. They've lost against newly promoted Parma. Have the wheels come off? Are we looking at Milan as we expect them to proceed for the entire season? Lars?
I'm expecting them to be better than this. Though, I mean, they played Torino in the first game, and really, they should have won that. It ended up 2-2. I've got the numbers in front of me. They had 26 shots to Torino's 7. So if you outshoot the opponent 26-7, you come out with a 2-2 draw, then things have not really gone your way. They were not good against Parma, though. Again, they produced more shots than the opponent by some margin, and it's early days, but the thing that worries me almost more, this could be entirely made up, who knows, but you can have a team like just start the season in a slightly iffy manner, new coach, this sort of stuff. You already have reports in the Italian press with Tuttosport suggesting that Paulo Fonseca is already under pressure, and suggestions that they might be considering bringing Massimiliano Allegri in, which I don't know, man. I feel like we've had years now. We've had several years of Allegri's, his reign at Juventus kind of petering out. And we've had these sort of very deep and existential discussions about whether his football is, fit for purpose in this century. And, they're so bad to watch and they don't even get that much results. As soon as he's out of work and Allegri is just kind of hanging around there and Milan drop a couple of points, there's like, ooh, maybe Allegri would be the thing. This sort of drives me slightly around the bend. You brought in Fonseca, who's a bit of a, let's say he's a footballing romantic. That's the way it goes. He's a guy who wants to attack. He wants to press. He's modern in inverted commas, whatever that even means. You can't already have these conversations 2 games in. That doesn't make any sense. Now, he did have a meeting with the Milan directors earlier in the week to discuss how things have been going. And, if I was him, maybe I'd be more diplomatic about it. But I would say, listen, in the first game, we created a bunch of chances. We were kind of all right-ish at times in the second game as well. This is a work in progress. Let's just, leave me alone.
Yeah, it is a work in progress, isn't it? You're absolutely right. And also, they've got a load of personnel issues at the moment. They are a team another team, Serie A team, that's been out there trading quite heavily and will continue to trade heavily until the deadline. And for that reason, it's quite hard to judge them, I think, before you get to the middle of September at the very least. I think it's just the nature of the opponents that's really made people sit up, and the fact they're very, very bad in the first half at Parma, who are a promoted team. Now, Torino, again, they're expected to knock over quite easily. Torino are a tough nut to crack, and you look at them going on and beating Atalanta as well. This is a good team. They've got good players, even if they've lost a few, including
Milan is supposed to be a better team, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, of course. But I think putting it in some sort of context is worthwhile, particularly in this very limited sample size at this point of the season. And Fonseca's had really dreadful luck with injuries. So Morata scores on his debut, gets injured instantly, and it's it's really tough to work with that, especially when you're betting in. The other thing that I would say about Fonseca, and Lars talked about him as a footballing romantic, he is someone who has a certain philosophy, which they signed him for, and which is definitely not Max Allegri's philosophy. So even if they did decide it was a terrible idea and they wanted to get rid of him, the idea that Allegri should be the next cab off the rank is insane.
I was trying to be polite and gentle about it, Andy, but yeah, no, that is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The other thing with Fonseca is he's a serial improver of players, even established players, and their technique. What do you need for that? You need time to work with them. And I think we all know how pressed clubs, teams, players have been this summer with the Euros, with the Copa America, with players coming back late, maybe a little bit weary. To work meaningfully on that improvement is really quite difficult when you don't have the time. Now, of course, you could reasonably ask, when is he ever going to find the time? There are 8 matches in the Champions League. But I think in terms of learning as a group, so whether that's on the training field, whether that's virtually, all these other techniques that players have nowadays, that is going to take a little bit of time as well. So I think you have to be reasonable about it.
He hasn't got all the time in the world.
He doesn't.
How much time do you think he's got? 2 games in, and they haven't done anything.
Well, look, I mean, I would be a liar if I said that Fatty Terim hadn't popped into my head over the last week. I mean, he does most weeks anyway.
I was about to say, I mean, that's just a normal week in the life of Andy Brassell.
Right, exactly. But I think when he arrived at Milan from Fiorentina, and we're talking like nearly 25 years ago now, here was someone who was brought in for a philosophy. And they gave him players. I mean, they let him try and build the team around Rui Costa, for goodness sakes. And then they got rid of him after 4 months. So no one's expecting them to get rid of Fonseca after 2 games. I mean, that would be ludicrous, and they know that. But I think you can like a coach, you can like his philosophy, you can like the plan of where he's going to take you. But you're right, going back to that, Dotun, that the pressure at Milan, because of the history, because of the name, is significant enough that you can't go half a season without results. So there needs to be some sort of binary improvement as well as some sort of, spiritual improvement over that period. He needs to author something significant in the short term, even if there are all these other factors at play that are sort of out of his control.
Well, on the personnel end of things, there is a very basic issue of the first 2 games, which is the striker situation. Like you say, Morata gets himself injured. And with Morata unavailable, you turn to, you have Luka Jovic playing up front, which nobody really wants, I don't think. He's a player who just never really fulfilled on his promise. And then you end up playing with Noah Okafor up front against Parma, who's a winger, who's not a striker. So last thing now is that they're trying to finalize a deal with Roma for Tammy Abraham, who his scoring record is not amazing, but he would at least give them a focal point up there. And if you look at the team, I mean, probably the most sort of promising part of the Milan team, or the one that gets me the most excited as a viewer, is that sort of line of attackers behind the striker, where you got Rafael, you got Pulisic, who's been doing some good things, you got Chukwueze to play in that part of the team. If you just have a centre forward who can lead the line and who can put himself about physically, tie up some defenders, make some space, I think you're going to get a lot of production out of those guys. Now, that's obviously something Morata can do really, really well if he's healthy, but you need another guy, and Jovic probably ain't it, and Okafor out of position probably ain't it. So Tammy Abraham coming in to hang out with Fikayo Tomori, forming like an English exile band there, I think, and Loftus-Cheek, not to mention. I kind of like that transfer.
Yeah, do you remember some time ago, Andy, when you introduced Lars to me as the world's expert on Zlatan Ibrahimović?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Do you remember that? Yeah. Is he still?
Oh, he definitely is.
I've got a Zlatan question to ask him now.
Prod him with it.
Okay. Lars, Zlatan Ibrahimović surely is one of the elephants, perhaps, in the room, of the boardroom, at least, of Milan. And what role does he play now in both, support or otherwise of Fonseca, but also improving the team?
I'd be very careful calling Zlatan an elephant to his face. He's got a very large
You're going to do that for us.
He's got a significant trunk. I don't know if he's very self-conscious about it, but listen, I think Ibra's journey is interesting, because right now, him being a director of stuff at Milan doesn't seem like that much of a departure, whereas like in his mid-career, you'd say him being the director of anything is a deranged idea. But he really did grow up.
I'm a Hammarby fan. Just remember what you said about one of yeah. Just be careful.
One of our dearest investors.
He was a wild child for so long, but he did really grow up towards the end of his career, and he did seem to mature and is in a sort of directorial role there, and I think he can actually have some useful input. And I don't know, again, it feels so weird 15 years ago that Ibra could be a voice of reason in that building. That never seemed like it could be a thing, but maybe it is now. Maybe he can tell everyone to settle down and let the guy work it for a bit, because we don't know what this team is supposed to look like yet. It's been 2 games. Everyone needs to settle down.
I suppose, as well as the fact that Ibrahimović is one of those who would look foolish if they got rid of Fonseca really early, because, he championed the appointment, just as he championed when he was still a player, keeping on Stefano Pioli, which turned out to be absolutely the right move, by the way. We have to say that, and Ibrahimović had a massive role in that. I guess the thing is, in terms of him as a football executive, we look at the name, but we don't know if he's going to be any good at that, do we?
No.
We might find out over the next year and a half, but, he's green at this sort of job. But what you were saying about his late career development, Lars, was really interesting to me, because in his 30s, and it's rarely acknowledged, he plays a great role at all his clubs, at PSG, at Milan. That's why they bring him back, with young players. He really helps to chaperone them, develop them. I wonder if part of this role still needs to be a pastoral role, because I think you look at some of those players, and notably one who he's already had a massive influence on when he's a player, Rafael Leao. Now, he had words with a fan after the Parma game, and he was at pains to stress it was one particular fan. I wasn't having a go at the fans behind the curva, I never would, etc. But since he signed this new contract, Lars, we would reasonably be expecting, like, Milan have invested a lot in him. We would be reasonably expecting an 8 out of 10 performance from him every week. We're not getting that at the moment. What role can Zlatan play in unlocking that? Because beyond looking at Fonseca, we've got to look at the players a bit as well.
Yeah, it's a funny one with Leo, because he has, a couple of years ago, it seemed like he was a player who was on the cusp of stepping into that very, very elite level of being someone who's a reliable game winner, who we can talk about in the same breath as, the other sort of top 5, top 15 attacking players in the world. But it feels like he's kind of remained on that cusp for a little while, and he will show flashes throughout the season when you go, oh my God, this player is quite special. But you're right, he maybe doesn't do it with the kind of regularity that you expect from a guy of his status, and that actually, frankly, Milan needs him to be for this team to really work and to make sense. Now, it's a very hard thing to judge from the outside what kind of character he is and what he really needs, but he does seem to have a temper. So it is possible that having big Ol Ibra in the background, kind of poking and prodding him a little bit and challenging him, perhaps what he needs is someone to have the kind of effect on him that Mino Raiola actually had on Ibrahimović when he was young. Ibrahimović, of course, was extremely gifted at Ajax, but wasn't consistent enough, wasn't actually scoring enough goals. He would do cool technical things all the time, but he wasn't, he wasn't efficient enough, maybe needed to work out a bit more. I mean, that doesn't seem to apply to Leao, but maybe someone who has a bit of authority, someone who can actually go in and be a bit fearless around him and poke him and say, listen, you can and should do better than this.
Yeah, why has he dropped off, Andy? Or why has he not gone beyond that cusp that Lars talks about? Rafael Leao, Lars is absolutely right. We thought he'd be a world beater at one point. He looked like, one of the people that was coming through. But why hasn't it happened?
He did. Well, we'll go back a couple of seasons. He was the first Serie A MVP. And, that is up against a lot of competition. So, look, I don't think any of us can profess that we know the exact reason. It's tempting to think that getting paid is a huge part of it. Where do you aim next? And it's all very well for us to say as onlookers, well, what about the hunger within and all that sort of stuff, But at the moment, what we do know is at the moment, Milan aren't getting the very best out of him. Portugal are not getting the very best out of him as well. Now, I think we have to go back and look at the context and look at the fact that he was in this very difficult financial situation, which I suspect was leaning on him quite heavily. Of course, he was one of the players who unilaterally rescinded his contract at Sporting after the training ground attack at Alcochete. And then he was being chased for money by Sporting via Lille for a number of years. Now, Milan have invested a lot in him, not just in paying him now, but in helping him sort out that situation. So, dare I say, a bit of emotional blackmail there might be called for. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if they want to get the very best out of him.
So you're calling for Ibra to blackmail someone? Is that what's happening? Mild-mannered Andy Brassell.
I don't need to call for him to do anything.
Yeah. You see, me
He'll deal with it as
describing him as an elephant in the room seems mild compared to
what a turnaround this
Brassell
is.
just
You know,
done.
the previously like notorious head case Ibrahimović being encouraged by mild man and football journalist Andy Brassell to do a bit of casual blackmailing.
It's not the supervillain you expected from this episode of OTC, is it?
Absolutely not.
Älskar dig Zlatan, bry dig inte om dem.
Wonderful.